Hey, it's Josh Vigar from Android Authority. What's going on, everybody? And every photo and video that you're seeing in this camera shootout was taken on the rotating camera of the Oppo N3.
And here we are testing out the camera on the Oppo N3. Some of these pictures you may have seen in my first look, but they all turned out quite well actually, and you'll see the 100 crops here as well. You'll also notice that the pictures that I'm taking on this particular camera shootout are pretty much all in 4:3 aspect ratio, so I can take advantage of the full 16 megapixel shots rather than cropping them down to the 13 megapixel shots at 16:9. But in good lighting, as you can see already here, we have quite a bit of detail inside of these photos, and when we do the 100 crops, yes, the detail is not quite as sharp as we might like them to be. They do tend to be a little bit smudgier, especially with the darker colors, but all in all, the original photo still yields a very nice looking shot. The color profiles in these photos take on a slightly higher color saturation than might be accurate to the original scene, but I actually think that's fine. It's at a pretty comfortable level so that you get a nice, vivid, saturated photo, and on the other side of the spectrum, you're almost never going to get a bland photo, especially if your lighting situations are adequate. And of course, the rotating camera motorized this time around will provide you a few more opportunities in order to get the shot off that you want, including certain pictures like doing foodie pictures, maybe taking pictures of people taking food, and also the ability to take a lot of different self-portraits, which you'll see later on as we get into a different situation. For now, I just wanted to show you the very well-lit photos, and we're going to get into some more overcast shots. There are quite a few modes available in the Oppo N3 camera app, and some of them you have to install after the fact because they're not already installed into the app. There are a bunch of them like Colorful Night, HDR, which we're going to take a look at later, Auto Panorama, which we're also going to take a look at a little bit later, and also a macro mode, which I played around with in the following pictures. Now, macro mode really zooms into the photo, and I do have to clarify, these pictures are still the larger 60 megapixel photos. They're just super zoomed in, as you can see in this little puff right here, and in this camera shot where I took a big macro shot into the raspberries inside of this dessert. They actually turned out quite detailed, and I was pretty impressed with those particular photos. And then from there, there's also manual control that includes manual focus, and from here I'm focusing on the rear bottle right there. The O-click provides another way for you to control the rotation now that it is motorized, and it is kind of fun to use at times when you have maybe someone popping in and out of the frame. Just hit the O-click, which was on my key fob, and you might get some funny shots like the ones I did right here. But now we're going to get into situations where the lighting may be less than ideal. In this case, it was a basketball game at the Staples Center where the court obviously is very well lit, so it means that those photos might look quite nice, but where we are seated, there's a lot less light. And in this case, I was trying to take a picture of myself with the front-facing rotated camera, but I had to use the flash, which does tend to flood the subject with a little bit too much light, and when coupled with the beautify modes, it just makes for a kind of a weird-looking photo. Not necessarily too accurate because it's trying to smooth everything out. In this case, I play around with the exposure and end up not using the flash, but instead the fill light, which in a lot of cases tended to really bring out a better photo. In this case, after the game, I had a glass of scotch right here, and as you can see, the low light performance is pretty bad until I turn on the flash, which did do a pretty good job here with the color tones, and then the fill flash just ended up not really providing the right color tone. You're going to have to choose between the two in order to get the shot that you want. So now let's take a look at these more scenic photos, this time in an overcast situation at Disneyland. The overcast and very cloudy situation made for more uniform lighting all around, which was nice, but it was here that I noticed something different about these photos. When facing backward for regular looking shots, the color temperature seems pretty accurate and maybe a little bit warm, but when you turn it around for self-portrait photos, the color temperature goes back down to the cooler side of the spectrum. It's not that big a deal, but something I really did notice, and it's something to consider on top of the fact that when you're using this camera fully rotated in the self-portrait mode, you do get very few modes when compared to the other way around. I also used the O-click in these situations. This is one of the few times I could do so in the busy crowds, and I just put the camera down, used the O-click, and was able to get this shot off, ready for cropping for social media. Situations to get some good photos off without having to use the flash started to become far and few between as the sun went down and we spent more time indoors. What you're seeing are well-lit shots in certain attractions on Disneyland, and like I said before, the flash does more to flood the subject rather than really illuminate it for a very good shot. This shot in particular, I used under a light that was outside rather than using the flash because using it or the fill light really is a hit and miss situation. But I also took this opportunity to use the video capabilities with the N3. 1080p video capture is available on the N3, and while I do think it's a nice camera to use for things like personal vlogging and for some quick shots out in the field, I do also think that the video quality is maybe just a little bit above average. There's still quite a few fragments. It's not the sharpest image that you'll find, and I feel like the bitrate could use a bump up just to make these videos pop a little bit more, make them even sharper. And of course, since the sun was going down, the shutter speed on the phone had to get a little bit slower for you to capture a good shot, which meant that capturing something moving was a little bit tougher. But now we're going to take a look at HDR mode, which I actually think is more of a hit than miss when it comes to the Oppo N3, and it used to be the case with other Oppo phones like the Find 7. It's the same story here on the N3. While there were some situations where I thought the HDR just didn't do a good job and blew out certain elements and didn't blow up other ones, I actually thought it did quite a good job here. For the most part, what HDR is going to be able to do is take a rather bland looking shot like this and make some of the colors punch out while brightening up many of the darker elements. There are going to be situations where you have to keep your hand steady in order to get a nice shot off. In this case, I wasn't, and it ended up getting a slightly blurry photo because I had to take those double or triple exposures. And for a quick fix for certain low light situations, you might be able to use the HDR to brighten up a photo, but like I said just now, you have to keep your hand pretty steady in order to keep the shot from getting a little bit blurry when stitching together all of those different exposures. And finally, let's take a look at the auto panorama. This is one of the main features that takes advantage of the motorized rotating camera of the Oppo N3, and I actually think it does quite a good job, especially in the right situations. Basically, what you will do is you will have the phone onto one of your sides, ready for the spectrum that you're trying to capture, and when you hit the button, the camera will rotate automatically in order to fill that panorama for you, so you don't really have to move yourself, and it takes the guesswork out of doing a panorama. You do have to pretty much hold your breath in because you have to keep the phone as steady as possible in order for you to do so. There are situations where this came in very handy, like at that basketball game where you can see here I took a nice big spectrum of the entire stadium, and I also even used it for one of those vertical situations that they showed at the press conference, where you start either from the top or the bottom, and then obviously it's going to move in the opposite direction. It is a nice feature to have. It is kind of cool, I guess, but it's not as practical as the left to right panorama, which I think is the one that a lot of you are going to use instead if you get the Oppo N3. And finally, we have a video, slow motion, of the fireworks at the end of the day in Disneyland. And so there you have it for this camera shootout using the Oppo N3. I wanted to take the time and show you guys what this camera is capable of in a lot of different situations. The rotation in the camera, now motorized, is of course a nice wow factor, but it wouldn't mean anything if the picture quality wasn't great. I would say that the N3 is a vast improvement from the N1 in terms of quality, and I like what comes out of it maybe 70% of the time. I put it in a more above average category. Yes, low light shots could use better quality, and the flash doesn't necessarily help all the time in those situations, and self-portraits have a somewhat over-exaggerated beautify mode that you can turn off, but then as long as you have pretty good conditions, you're going to get a pretty nice photo and video, though it does require a little bit higher bit rate for those videos to really pop. But ultimately, you can wait for my full review of the Oppo N3. I've been using this phone for a little while now, and I can't wait to bring you my full review. Stay tuned for that, and don't forget to check out my colleagues in Android, and remember, drop us some likes on our videos, subscribe to our channel if you haven't already, and when you're done with all that, head on over to androidauthority.com because we are your source for all things Android.